Hey everybody, welcome back and thank you for watching. Again, just want to thank you guys for engaging with me constantly on here on the blog and on Facebook groups, on Twitter, on Instagram, everywhere. You guys have been great and it's been really encouraging to know that what I'm putting out is useful to you all. So this blog is a very personal blog. If you watch Finding Your Voice Part 2, in that blog I talked about my struggles with finding my voice, and one of the reasons I had a hard time finding my voice was because of fear. So in this blog I want to dive a little bit deeper into fear, how it can be debilitating, especially when it comes to memoir. So I know a lot of writers, especially as I was going through my MFA program, I had a lot of fellow students who did not particularly enjoy the nonfiction classes, the creative nonfiction classes, because you have to talk about yourself. And it's not easy writing about yourself and your life, right? Sometimes it's easier to create a character and tell snippets of your life through a character, through fiction. Those of you who have written memoir, who are working on memoirs right now, you guys are brave and it takes a lot of courage. Writing memoir is a type of therapy. It's kind of like going to a therapist. You have to really get to know yourself. You have to really dig deep into yourself. And you have to be brutally honest with yourself. Because if you're not honest with yourself, then your writing doesn't sound honest either. You have to come to terms with things you did or things that were done to you in your past. And you have to overcome this fear of the past and write it down. So we all have different types of fears, and as I mentioned in my previous blog, a lot of this fear shows itself as procrastination. But some of my fears include something as small as, oh, someone's gonna get offended, to something as big as, oh, I don't have a right to tell the story. Or someone who's going to read this story is not going to like the way I wrote about them, or people will not like the things that I'm talking about in my memoir. And just, exposing your vulnerabilities, being emotional, all these things are just not easy to do. Fears like, oh, I'm not representing my race well, I'm not representing my ethnicity well, or I'm not representing my gender well. There are a lot of critiques out there, especially when you're on the internet. You hear a lot of people critiquing you and trying to discredit you. So, there are a lot of things to be fearful about when writing your personal story out for the world to see. You're worried about what people might think of you if you tell a secret that was buried for years or generations or something. When you write a memoir, you're going to lose some people. There will be some people who, get offended or whatever. That's going to happen if you tell the truth. You might also worry that nobody will care about your story. And that's also a valid fear, that, you're pouring your heart out into something and then they'll be like, so who cares? Your story's not that interesting, or your writing's not that interesting, So we have all these fears, and all these fears can be debilitating when it comes to writing memoir. And for me personally, it was keeping me from having that bold, strong voice. It was keeping my writing from sounding like me. From being my authentic self. So the faster we overcome these fears, the more honest we can be in our writing, and the more authentic and bold our voices will be in our memoirs. There are some strategies that I used to help me get over this fear, and it's something that I'm constantly working on. Of course, it doesn't just go away. You always have this fear, but you can learn how to kind of deal with it. One of the ways that's kind of helped me is to constantly remind myself of the purpose of why am I writing this memoir? What is the purpose? Are you writing this memoir just to get revenge or vent about some bad stuff that happened to you? Are you writing this memoir to open people's minds or to change the literary world? You have to make sure that you have a bigger purpose than just venting or just trying to get something off your chest or trying to make somebody look bad. Those are petty reasons, and you need to have bigger reasons than that to tell the story, even if injustice was done to you. So for example, my purpose is to add something to the literary world that it doesn't have, there aren't that many Indian American women writers out right now. They're very few, and I, am totally in awe of them. When I was growing up, I didn't know any, honestly. If they were out there, they weren't reaching me as a child in America. Now I know a handful. I could count on one hand the number of Indian American writers I know. And not all Indian American women have the same story. The purpose of my memoir is to add to the Indian American woman story, add to the literary world something that it doesn't have or doesn't have enough of. So you have to find a bigger purpose. Maybe it was a lesson you learned through life, through your experiences that you want to share, that you think is for the betterment of society, things like that. You have to have a big purpose to your memoir. And when you keep constantly reminding yourself of that purpose, then it helps you get over your fear, because you're like, this is not just about me and my fear. This is about changing the world, opening people's minds. So you're doing it not just for yourself. And just to reiterate, make sure you're not writing just to make people look bad, okay? Because that will lead you to a defamation lawsuit, and you don't want that on your plate, and it's just not a good reason to write a memoir. Another thing that I had to really get over the fear was to realize that this is my story. It doesn't matter who I'm talking about or what I'm talking about. It's my story, and I have every right to tell my story. Okay, regardless of how other people might think, this is my truth, it's my story, and I have every right to tell it the way I want to tell it. It's my job to make sure I tell the truth from my perspective, right? Everyone has a different experience. It's nonfiction, you're not making stuff up, you can't lie, you have to tell facts. But everyone has their own experience, right, of the truth. And so it's my job to tell my truth. And if other people don't like the way I tell my truth, that's their problem, because then they need to write their own memoir and tell their own truth. And lastly, this sounds kind of obvious, but it's something I have to constantly keep reminding myself of, is that this is my life and no one else has lived the life that I have lived. So nobody else can tell the story that I can tell. It's my story, and if I don't tell it, no one else will. It will never come out. And if I think it's a story that will better the world, that will help people, or change the world in any way, then it's my job to tell it, because nobody else can tell my story for me. So this is another thing that kind of keeps me going and helps me overcome the fear of being honest and straightforward in my writing. Those are just a few techniques that I use to kind of help me deal with fear. Basically, you have to do a lot of digging, and it requires a lot of self-awareness. If you guys have any tips or techniques that you can share with me that have worked for you to help you get over fear, please feel free to share in the comments. I could always use more techniques to help get over this fear, because that is the hardest part of writing a memoir and writing about yourself. So once again, thank you all for watching, and I'm so grateful to have you guys sharing and communicating with me constantly. Again, next week's blog will be about the importance of critique groups. You guys have heard me mention critique groups several times, and I'm sure many of you have experiences with critique groups, have your own. So I'm going to talk about critique groups and how they help. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next Wednesday. Bye.